MBAs are used to adapting. MBA programs are also used to like highly competitive environments, both from the business side and also from the education side. So I don't think they're daunted. I don't think they're scared. Maybe they should be a little bit more than they are.
As business schools grapple with changing market demands and evolving student expectations, the MBA landscape is experiencing unprecedented transformation. From accelerated formats and hyper-specialized tracks to innovative delivery methods that promise greater return on investment. Today, I'm joined by Oren Margolis, an MBA admissions consultant and leadership coach, who brings a unique dual perspective, having spent 6 years in full-time admissions roles at NYU Stern, while also working as a talent development leader at high-growth companies like Nova Credit. With his experience launching new MBA programs and evaluating thousands of applicants, Oren offers invaluable insights into what an MBA really delivers in today's rapidly evolving professional landscape. Oren, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you. That's quite the introduction, and I am honored to be here.
I'm glad to have you. It's great, and it's all true. We talk a lot about business schools and MBAs on this show, and we're seeing business schools launch everything from 1 year, highly focused concentrations to online hybrid programs, which many of them weren't done years ago. This proliferation of formats seems unprecedented to me. How is this meeting the needs of students personally and professionally? And then I guess, how is it also meeting the demands of the workforce now and beyond, if you can answer it that way?
I think this evolution is like precedented and unprecedented. Business schools have always been trying to kind of wedge in where they can. And so I think a lot of our conversation today will be like, yeah, the landscape is new, but also it's not. There have been so many questions about the value of an MBA since the dawn of time. So MBAs are used to that. MBAs are used to adapting. MBA programs are also used to like highly competitive environments, both from the business side and also from the education side. So I don't think they're daunted. I don't think they're scared. Maybe they should be a little bit more than they are. But at the same time, there are still very real conversations about the ROI of MBA programs. There always have been. There still are. The conversation looks a little bit different. Students are thinking in different ways about like, what is this degree worth? What can it do for me? The pace of business, the pace of career acceleration has changed like fundamentally, right? And so people are thinking, about how they are spending their time, how they are investing their time, and how they're investing their money more critically than they have before. And so these new formats, like hybrid formats and whatnot, they weren't possible before. So we're seeing business schools like leverage technology in order to be able to just reach more students, which is great, be able to do it with technology and be able to appeal to kind of the time equation. Like, how can I be in more places at once, essentially? And that fits in with a lot of students' like cadence and pace of life. And these are students who, by and large, have been online their whole educational careers at this point. So there's a level of familiarity that didn't necessarily exist anymore. The promise of a part-time MBA, for example, has been there for a long time. Earn money, don't sacrifice income while doing an MBA. But the ability to do that if you live in a rural area and want access to, let's say, a more highly prestigious degree, has not always been possible. So the equation is kind of like been plied in a couple of weird ways that haven't been possible before. I will say that the fundamental promise of an MBA hasn't really changed in my estimation. And schools are still trying to keep up with that with varying levels of success, in my opinion. So that's kind of like an intro to the answer. I'm not sure if I covered all parts of the question. There were a couple different parts, so let me know what I missed.
No, well, you did, and I kind of want to double click on something you said that maybe is a second question, talking about the demands on students and what they really want, and then also their familiarity with online learning and kind of flexible schedules. You've worked in admissions, you've worked with a lot of applicants, you've seen the applicant pool evolve over this time, especially with millennials and Gen Z, who seem to have very different career expectations than previous generations may have had with the traditional MBAs. How are these shifting student priorities, whether it's work-life integration or social impact or rapid career mobility. How are these shifting priorities forcing MBA programs to rethink their value proposition?
I don't 100% buy it, to be honest. What I will say is I don't know if the career priorities and career expectations, or let's say overall expectations of millennials and Gen Z, are like that fundamentally different from generations before them. I do think that the market landscape has shifted dramatically, right? The economy is in a different place than it was 20 years ago. Millennials and Gen Z have seen different things happen before them that has frankly shaken their faith in what an MBA could potentially do for them. The idea of stability is no longer something that is a given, particularly for, at this point, younger millennials and Gen Z that are kind of peak or prime age for MBA programs. And so I think there's a lot more cynicism and skepticism in the market with similar expectations that have been the onus of MBA programs in the past, which is get me a new job, help me make a drastic pivot, get me into banking or consulting. What the demand for that pivot is has definitely changed. So when thinking about the demand to pivot into high paid industries, a lot of those are in tech now. And does tech really kind of like value the skill set that an MBA can provide, or frankly, like want to hire a lot of folks that are coming from more of an academic setting? What we're seeing now is no, they were willing to take a chance a couple of years ago, but the bubbles kind of burst and MBA hiring into tech is kind of tenuous at this point. So the market's different than it was before. Frankly, career services centers are arguably less able to kind of promise what they used to in the past. And that has always been kind of the bedrock of the value prop of an MBA program is career outcomes. And so it's starting to break a little bit, in my opinion, when you have career centers starting to urge students to be better self-starters. There is kind of a cognitive disconnect there that's hard to ignore. It's understandable from the vantage point of career services centers, but when thinking at a top level about, okay, MBA seekers are going to business schools in some way, shape, or form for career outcomes, MBA programs are less able to, with gusto and kind of resolve, promise those career outcomes. It's shaky.
It brings
right?
up
It's
an
a shaky
interesting
equation.
point, just to kind of go off script for a second here, that, sometimes a student who's qualified to get into a highly selective MBA program would have equally been qualified to get that job at Amazon or Google or whatever before the MBA. And then it kind of begs the question, like,
Totally.
should you even have done the MBA, or like, what is the point of it? If career services wants to make sure that you would already have gotten that job before you get admitted, it sort of raises the question about the ROI to the earlier point.
So I talk about ROI in a lot of different ways. Most people, the majority of people, are thinking about ROI as, or at least of MBA seekers. I know you talk much wider or broader than the MBA ecosystem on your podcast, but my world is primarily concerned with MBAs. And MBA seekers are often thinking about ROI in terms of what is my salary now and what will my salary be in 2 years? And that's where that equation is tricky in this current landscape. I would put forward, though, that it's a somewhat short-sighted way of thinking about ROI. Time horizon is something that people, in my opinion, drastically under-index on when thinking about the ROI equation. So yeah, it is really possible with a really volatile economy that an MBA might leave their full-time MBA program and see a pay cut. However, what you might see is a drastically accelerated career trajectory that allows them to be where they never would have been otherwise in 2, 5, 10, or 20 years post MBA. And so I don't know if business schools are doing the best job right now of articulating some kind of talking points around ROI that span beyond your 6-month post MBA salary. But I do think that that's a conversation that needs to be out there more than it is. The savvy students are the ones that are thinking about, okay, how am I building a network that will serve me long term? How am I thinking about taking out a quote unquote insurance policy in my ability to, procure really high level C-suite jobs 10 to 20 years from now? How am I thinking about my performance in the jobs that I will be getting in 2, 5, and 10 years, and my ability to successfully lead a team without getting fired, right? Like these are things that an MBA does provide to people, whether the hiring workforce would like to admit it or not. And so some of those things are tangible and some of those things are really intangible. It is really fun to get people out of the trap of just thinking about ROI in terms of numbers in a like 2 to 3 year time horizon.
And you're right. I mean, well, look, if you go to Harvard Business School, you go to Wharton, you go to Tuck, you go to Ross, Stern, Johnson, you go to any of these high ticket MBA programs, it's a calling card for the rest of your career. And there's a definite ROI because really it is going to lift you no matter what over the career progression. I know for others that don't have the recognition necessarily of some of those top tier programs, while whether they're probably very good programs in their own right, but maybe they just don't have the brand. There's an ongoing debate about whether these programs that really need to carve out a market are keeping pace with the speed of business transformation to actually provide skills for students, certainly right now, but maybe even beyond. What challenges are schools facing to stay current, especially with the evolving workforce needs we're talking about?
I'll sidetrack a little bit and just say pedigree is not the only like medium to long-term accelerator that an MBA provides. And like there are a lot of students out there that benefit primarily from skill building. And I was just having this conversation. Someone who has maybe like fallen or lucked into investment banking has had a lovely career since then, did their pivot into PE, which is the hope and dream of any 2-year MBA, but are really figuring out the fact that their skill gaps are like catching up with them. And that's where, an MBA from Harvard is in no way necessary to actually increase people's performance. It really is about getting a quality academic program that teaches the things that need to be taught. I don't know if that's necessarily the messaging that non-quote unquote top tier MBAs are putting out there into the world. I find that a lot of messaging still is around things like breaking into new industries, like career promises. And from where I sit, I think a lot of students are looking at that with a very skeptical lens. I don't know if that's a marketing problem. I don't know if it's a programmatic issue. I have been on the front row to a lot of like low performance challenges, people being pegged as low performers in their jobs. An MBA is not necessarily the only answer to that question, but folks that do have better grounding in skills and also leadership abilities have the ability to perform better in their jobs. And so I don't see a lot of that messaging out there in the marketplace, which is back to basics, if you will.
It kind of inspires another question around the sort of the idea of talent. And we've worked in talent development companies or at companies that do things around talent development like Nova Credit and Westfield. And you've seen both sides, to your point. What MBA graduates bring to an organization and what employers actually need, and whether there's a disconnect or not, how has your experience shaped your perspective on the practical value of an MBA to kind of continue what you were saying, particularly when it comes to leadership development and organizational effectiveness? Where is that value?
My takeaway when kind of mulling this question around is that the practical value of an MBA is actually quite high. And I come at that from a biased vantage point. There are a lot of folks that find themselves in leadership positions that have never learned of or even thought about the building blocks of what good leadership can and should look like. And this is an area where I believe that MBAs do actually provide some real value, because core to any MBA program is coursework on leadership, on organizational development, on business ethics, which, sometimes those courses can like elicit eye rolls from an MBA population. But the fact remains that they're dedicating at least a certain amount of credit hours to thinking critically about these concepts in action. They are seeing breadth across different industries. They're engaging with case studies. They are engaging with functions that are not their own function. And so there's nothing worse than that finance leader, for example, who only knows how to do finance, view problems through the lens of finance, engage with other finance people. And this is where I think MBAs actually unexpectedly tend to shine in the workforce. I think there's a lot of skepticism around MBA hiring, especially in certain industries and workforces. But this is the area where I think some of that well-roundedness really does come onto the stage in a meaningful way. Of course, the opposite could be true. There are plenty of folks who are rightfully skeptical of the like ivory tower perspective that MBAs might bring to a workforce. And, these are people who don't know how to roll up their sleeves and that kind of thing. That dynamic 100% exists. So at a certain point, you are hiring for the right person, not like the degree that they have. But I've seen both scenarios kind of bear out. I do think, though, that a lot of organizations are experiencing some real leadership gaps. And any MBA program that's worth its salt will at least have students engaging with those concepts and thinking about them in critical ways. So there is a level of exposure that is not always.
You hit a nerve with me about pedagogy and credits. When you think about the fact that there are MBA programs out there that are 60 credits, there are MBA programs out there that are 45 credits. There are MBA programs out there that are 36 credits. And the speed to degree is a thing. And yet at the same time, the cost of attendance is radically different for those different programs. It speaks to the idea, and maybe just this is the part where we can think about the future. There are alternative credentials out there. There are credentials like Google Career Certificates. There are short courses. We talk about Harvard Business School. Harvard Business School Online does leadership certificates. I have one of them. It was a great program. It was all asynchronous. They have executive education programs. Lots of schools do. And even AI now is changing how we think about business skills. How would you advise prospective students to evaluate whether an MBA is still the right investment for them? What questions should a prospective student be asking themselves and programs to ensure that they're making a decision that's going to serve their career goals 5-10 years from now?
The number one problem that I love helping people through is like, should I even get this MBA in the first place? It is shocking, like just shocking, the amount of people that come to me knowing that they want to do an MBA, but literally not knowing why. I think a lot of people are unhappy in their jobs or, place an MBA on a pedestal without really understanding structurally what it is and can do and can't do. The rising tide that lifts all boats it's really twofold. It's one, like, why am I pursuing this degree in the first place? What can I expect this degree to do for me? And B, what are my career goals? What are my career aspirations, short-term, medium, and long-term? And then working backwards and doing an inventory of, okay, what am I planning to use this MBA actually for? If the answer is to learn finance, the question becomes, is an MBA the right vehicle for me to learn finance? Or are there other shorter, drastically less expensive ways for me to learn finance while still progressing in my career that, you might otherwise be happy with? I also really encourage people to do an inventory of their own values. Like, what are they actually solving for? If you are looking to build a network of diverse professionals in industry, there are other ways to do that, of course, but an MBA is actually a pretty solid way to do that, especially if it's an experience that you're excited about. You're investing both in the short term, but also in the medium to long term. So there are a lot of different ways of solving a lot of different problems. Some are worth $200,000. Some are worth $30,000. Some are worth $0, right? And I really encourage people, and especially these days, to think about their risk appetite, the trajectory that they would be on otherwise, their family and life obligations, where they are in life, like what actually works for their schedule, career, life responsibilities. These are all things that are very, very valid in this whole equation. And to think about what time horizon you are expecting the ROI to look like. I think that really tackling your why is the important key, and then working backwards in figuring out what a school actually offers and how credible that offer actually is.
Well said, and a good place to leave our conversation. Oren Margolis, Pinetree Palm Consulting. Thanks so much for your insights.
Thank you, Ray.
So here's my take. What strikes me about this conversation is how the MBA's identity crisis is actually forcing programs to become more intentional about their unique value. It's no longer enough to just promise networking and prestige when students can access knowledge and connections through multiple pathways, usually lower cost. Oren's insights reveal that the most successful programs are those that recognize the MBA's evolving role as a leadership laboratory, where the real value lies not just in what you learn, but in how you think, how you adapt, and lead in ambiguous situations. As the business landscape continues to accelerate, the MBA programs that thrive will be those that embrace this transformation rather than resisting it, and create experiences that are both deeply practical and fundamentally transformative. The question isn't whether the MBA has a future, it's whether business schools can reimagine it quickly enough to stay relevant.